If sometimes it is desirable to relax the tightness of the canon form, one way is to allow slight departures from perfect copying for the sake of more fluid harmony. Also, some canons have free voices which do not employ the canon's theme, but which simply harmonize agreeably with the voices that are in canon with each other. Each of the canons in the musical offering has for its theme a different variant of the king's theme, and all the devices described above for making canons intricate are exploited to the hilt. In fact, they are occasionally combined. Thus, one three-voice canon is labeled canon per augmentationem cantario motu. Its middle voice is free, in fact. It sings the royal theme, while the other two dance canonically above and below it using the devices of augmentation and inversion. If another bears simply the cryptic label querendo inveniatus, by seeking, you will discover all of the canon puzzles have been solved. The canonical solutions were given by one of Bach's pupils, Johann Philipp Kernberger, but one might still wonder whether there are more solutions to seek. I should also explain briefly what a fugue is. If a fugue is like a canon in that it is usually based on one theme which gets played in different voices and different keys, and occasionally at different speeds or upside down or backwards. However, the notion of fugue is much less rigid than that of canon, and consequently it allows for more emotional and artistic expression. The telltale sign of a fugue is the way it begins with a single voice singing its theme. When it is done, then a second voice enters, either 5 scale notes up or 4 down. Meanwhile, the first voice goes on, singing the counter-subject, a secondary theme chosen to provide rhythmic, harmonic, and melodic contrast to the subject. Each of the voices enters in turn, singing the theme, often to the accompaniment of the counter-subject in some other voice, with the remaining voices doing whatever fanciful things entered the composer's mind. When all the voices have arrived, then there are no rules. There are, to be sure, standard kinds of things to do, but not so standard that one can merely compose a fugue by formula. The 2 fugues in the musical offering are outstanding examples of fugues that could never have been composed by formula. There is something much deeper in them than mere fugality. All in all, the musical offering represents one of Bach's supreme accomplishments in counterpoint, if it is itself one large intellectual fugue in introduction. A musico-logical offering 18 which many ideas and forms have been woven together, and in which playful double meanings and subtle allusions are commonplace. And it is a very beautiful creation of the human intellect which we can appreciate forever. The entire work is wonderfully described in the book F.S. Bach's Musical Offering by H.T. David, an endlessly rising canon. There is one canon in the musical offering which is particularly unusual. Labeled simply canon per tonos, it has 3 voices. The uppermost voice sings a variant of the royal theme, while underneath it, 2 voices provide a canonic harmonization based on a second theme. The lower of this pair sings its theme in C minor, which is the key of the canon as a whole, and the upper of the pair sings the same theme displaced upwards in pitch by an interval of a fifth. What makes this canon different from any other, however, is that when it concludes, or rather seems to conclude it, is no longer in the key of C minor, but now is in D minor. Somehow Bach has contrived to modulate change keys right under the listener's nose. And it is so constructed that this ending ties smoothly onto the beginning again. Thus one can repeat the process and return in the key of E, only to join again to the beginning. These successive modulations lead the ear to increasingly remote provinces of tonality, so that after several of them one would expect to be hopelessly far away from the starting key, and yet magically, after exactly 6 such modulations, the original key of C minor has been restored. All the voices are exactly 1 octave higher than they were at the beginning, and here the piece may be broken off in a musically agreeable way. Such, one imagines, was Bach's intention, but Bach indubitably also relished the implication that this process could go on ad infinitum, which is perhaps why he wrote in the margin, as the modulation rises, so may the king's glory, to emphasize its potentially infinite aspect. I like to call this the endlessly rising canon. If in this canon, Bach has given us our first example of the notion of strange loops, the strange loop phenomenon occurs whenever by moving upwards or downwards through the levels of some hierarchical system, we unexpectedly find ourselves right back where we started. Here, the system is that of musical keys. Sometimes I use the term tangled hierarchy to describe a system in which a strange loop occurs. As we go on, the theme of strange loops will recur again and again. If sometimes it will be hidden, other times it will be out in the open. Sometimes it will be right side up, other times it will be upside down, or backwards. Querendo inveniatus is my advice to the reader. Escher, to my mind, the most beautiful and powerful visual realizations of this notion of strange loops exist in the work of the Dutch graphic artist M.C. Escher, who lived from 1902 to 1972. Escher was the creator of some of the introduction, a musico-logical offering 19 figure 5. Waterfall by M.C. Escher. Lithograph 1961, most intellectually stimulating drawings of all time. Many of them have their origin in paradox, illusion, or double meaning. Mathematicians were among the first admirers of Escher's drawings, and this is understandable because they often are based on mathematical principles of symmetry or pattern. But there is much more to a typical Escher drawing than just symmetry or pattern. There is often an underlying idea realized in artistic form. If and in particular, the strange loop is one of the most recurrent themes in Escher's work. Look, for example, at the lithograph waterfall. Fig. 5, and compare its 6-step endlessly falling loop with the 6-step endlessly rising loop of the canon per tonos. The similarity of vision is Introduction, a musicological offering 20 figure 6, Ascending and Descending, by M.C. Escher, lithograph 1960. Introduction, a musicological offering 21 remarkable. Bach and Escher are playing one single theme in two different keys, music and art. Escher realized strange loops in several different ways, and they can be arranged according to the tightness of the loop. The lithograph Ascending and Descending, Fig. 6, in which monks trudge forever in loops, is the loosest version, since it involves so many steps before the starting point is regained. A tighter loop is contained in Waterfall, which, as we already observed, involves only 6 discrete steps. You may be thinking that there is some ambiguity in the notion of a single step, for instance. Couldn't ascending and descending be seen just as easily as having 4 levels, staircases as 45 levels, stairs? It is indeed true that there is an inherent figure 7 hand with reflecting globe. Self-portrait in M.C. Escher, lithograph 1935. Introduction, a musicological offering 22 Introduction, a musicological offering 23 Haziness and level counting, not only in Escher pictures, but in hierarchical, many-level systems. We will sharpen our understanding of this haziness later on, but let us not get too distracted now as we tighten our loop. We come to the remarkable drawing hands, figure 135, in which each of 2 hands draws the other, a 2-step strange loop. If, and finally, the tightest of all strange loops is realized in Print Gallery, fig. 142, a picture which contains itself. Or is it a picture of a gallery which contains itself, or of a town which contains itself, or a young man who contains himself? Incidentally, the illusion underlying Ascending and Descending and Waterfall was not invented by Escher, but by Roger Penrose, a British mathematician, in 1958. If, however, the theme of the strange loop was already present in Escher's work in 1948, the year he drew Drawing Hands, Print Gallery dates from 1956. Implicit in the concept of strange loops is the concept of infinity, since what else is a loop but a way of representing an endless process in a finite way, and infinity plays a large role in many of Escher's drawings. Copies of one single theme often fit into each other, forming visual analogues to the canons of Bach. Several such patterns can be seen in Escher's famous print metamorphosis, Fig. 8. It is a little like the endlessly rising canon, wandering further and further from its starting point, it suddenly is back. In the tiled planes of metamorphosis and other pictures, there are already suggestions of infinity, but wilder visions of infinity appear in other drawings by Escher. In some of his drawings, one single theme can appear on different levels of reality. For instance, one level in a drawing might clearly be recognizable as representing fantasy or imagination. Another level would be recognizable as reality. These 2 levels might be the only explicitly portrayed levels. But the mere presence of these 2 levels invites the viewer to look upon himself as part of yet another level. And by taking that step, the viewer cannot help getting caught up in Escher's implied chain of levels, in which for any one level there's always another level above it of greater reality, and likewise there's always a level below more imaginary than it is. This can be mind-boggling in itself. However, what happens if the chain of levels is not linear, but forms a loop? What is real then, and what is fantasy? The genius of Escher was that he could not only concoct but actually portray dozens of half-real, half-mythical worlds filled with strange loops, which he seems to be inviting his viewers to enter. Gödel and the examples we have seen of strange loops by Bach and Escher, there is a conflict between the finite and the infinite, and hence a strong sense of paradox. Intuition senses that there is something mathematical involved here, if and indeed in our own century a mathematical counterpart was discovered with the most enormous repercussions. And just as the Bach and Escher loops appealed to very simple and ancient intuitions of musical scale, a staircase so this discovery by K. Gödel of a strange loop in Introduction, a musicological offering 24 figure 9, Kurt Gödel, Introduction, a musicological offering 25 mathematical systems has its origins in simple and ancient intuitions. If in its absolutely barest form, Gödel's discovery involves the translation of an ancient paradox in philosophy into mathematical terms, that paradox is the so-called Epimenides paradox, or liar paradox. Epimenides was a Cretan who made one immortal statement: all Cretans are liars. A sharper version of the statement is simply I am lying, or this statement is false, it is that last version which I will usually mean when I speak of the Epimenides paradox. If it is a statement which rudely violates the usually assumed dichotomy of statements into true and false, because if you tentatively think it is true, then it immediately backfires on you and makes you think it is false. But once you've decided it is false, a similar backfiring returns you to the idea that it must be true. Try it. The Epimenides paradox is a one-step strange loop like Escher's print gallery. But how does it have to do with mathematics? That is what Gödel discovered. His idea was to use mathematical reasoning and exploring mathematical reasoning itself. This notion of making mathematics introspective proved to be enormously powerful, and perhaps its richest implication was the one Gödel found, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. What the theorem states and how it is proved are two different things. We shall discuss both in quite some detail in this book. The theorem can be likened to a pearl, and the method of proof to an oyster. The pearl is prized for its luster and simplicity. The oyster is a complex living beast whose innards give rise to this mysteriously simple gem. Gödel's theorem appears as Proposition 6 in his 1931 paper on formally undecedable propositions in Principia Mathematica and Related Systems I. It states, to every W consistent recursive class K of formulae there correspond recursive class signs R, such that neither v gen R nor neg v gen R belongs to fig K, where v is the free variable of R. Actually, it was in German, and perhaps you feel that it might as well be in German anyway, so here is a paraphrase in more normal English. All consistent axiomatic formulations of number theory include undecidable propositions. This is the pearl. In this pearl it is hard to see a strange loop. That is because the strange loop is buried in the oyster, the proof. The proof of Gödel's incompleteness theorem hinges upon the writing of a self-referential mathematical statement, in the same way as the Epimenides paradox is a self-referential statement of language. But whereas it is very simple to talk about language in language, it is not at all easy to see how a statement about numbers can talk about itself. In fact, it took genius merely to connect the idea of self-referential statements with number theory. Once Gödel had the intuition that such a statement could be created, he was over the major hurdle. The actual creation of the statement was the working out of this one beautiful spark of intuition.